I use this SONY DSC-WX7 camera for shooting videos, but it's horrible how quickly the battery dies in this small compact camera. I want to hack the battery to have bigger recording time on this camera. You maybe think it's an easy task, but be sure it is not an easy task, because these cameras and batteries are very well protected against hacking it. I've tried to hack it once, but my attempt to do it ended as a fail. However, today I finally got the idea how I can hack the battery and make my recording time longer. So prepare yourself for a good video and let's go do it! The battery is dead. For safety reasons I discharged the battery completely. And watch. We are going! Of course the battery is dead. But this is good sign. It works! Alright, here is prepared what I need. Here is the charger. Here is the connector, which will be for the camera, like this. And here I am also gonna be using it as a power bank. So here I can switch the 5 volts USB output. And here is the 4600 milliamp hours 3.7 volt lithium battery. Alright, let's talk a little while about this project. It was very cheap project which didn't cost me more than 2 euros and I mostly spent home supplies. For example, the lithium battery gave me my friend MDF was for free. Only charging module and USB step-up module I bought from eBay. Links on them will be in below. I have already tested the performance of the external battery. My compact camera was able to work more than 3.5 hours on this external battery, and it means the camera lasted to operate more than 4 times longer than the original battery. However, it's important to mention that in this connection now isn't the proper low voltage protection and the battery possibly can be discharged into 0 volts and it can damage the battery. So now I must be careful and may not allow to completely discharge the battery. Another thing I was worried about at the testing external battery is that this battery is able to supply more current than the original battery, and when the camera is working for longer time supplied from this high current source, it can possibly damage itself after being overheated. So if you will build a similar thing, watch the temperature of your camera and when it became warm, let it cool for some time. Because with this external battery you can easily push the operation time into the point where the camera wasn't designed to work. The most important thing on this build was to remove the lithium cell from the original battery, but I had to be careful not to destroy the protection circuit which was placed under the contacts. Because this protective circuit communicates with the camera and tells the camera some important informations. If you're gonna work with a lithium battery, be very careful not to overheat it with the soldering iron or not to penetrate it with something. Always use a proper charger module which is built for lithium batteries. And never short circuit the battery terminals because the battery is extremely powerful and you can easily burn everything. I took away the protective circuit from the tablet battery, which wasn't very clever thing. But I was working with discharge battery and with the protective circuit on the tablet battery it didn't want to work. So I decided to take the protection away and I replaced the protection with 2 amps fuse. And this means now I have at least high current protection if something. I will be glad if you subscribe to my channel. I keep working on other projects in my hobby workshop. In near future I will be releasing another videos. Thanks for watching.